In this lesson, we're going to implement a new feature letting users sign up and sign into our application using their Google accounts, instead of using regular credentials like email and password. For most applications, and for those who want to provide for the needs of their users, it is very important to offer one-click authentication options like Google Auth to make it easier to register and log into apps. In this lesson, we'll be setting everything up in our Nest application. Also, make sure to check out the 2 previous text-based lessons as they are companions to everything we will be doing here. One lesson is about instructions on how to set up a new Google project via the GCP dashboard, and the other lesson is on how to test our Google authentication flow. After all, we will need a UI to do so make sure to check out the lesson on creating a Google Auth front-end demo where you can set up a very basic React application in order for us to test everything. But note that this could be done with anything, any front-end framework of your choice, a mobile application, etc. So back to our task at hand, let's switch to our IDE and start by updating our .env file. Inside the .env file, let's declare 2 new environment variables, Google Client ID and Google Client Secret. You can get these IDs from your GCP dashboard if you've set all that up already. If not, make sure to go through both of those text-based lessons first before continuing further along in this lesson. Next, let's open up our terminals, and first let's install a new dependency that we'll need to use to verify Google tokens, the Google Auth library package. Once the installation process is complete, let's generate a new service and put it inside of IAM, Authentication, Social, and call it Google Authentication Service. Let's also create its corresponding controller in the same location. Okay, great. Let's open up our newly generated Google Authentication Service and declare the OAuth client private property of type OAuth2 client imported from the Google Auth library we just installed. Now, let's inject 3 dependencies into our services constructor: config service, authentication service, and our user repository. Also, let's implement the onModule init interface, as we're going to want to do a few things when the module initializes in our application's lifecycle. Inside the onModule init method, let's initialize the OAuth client by calling new OAuth2Client, passing in both our client ID and client secret, both which we can get from our env file. Great. Next, let's define an authenticate method, which will do all the heavy lifting here. This method takes 1 parameter, which is the access token issued by Google. Using the OAuth client, let's retrieve the user-specific information as follows. Now, before we move further, let's really quickly navigate to the user entity class and make 2 additions there as well. First, we'll need a new column called Google ID that will contain values only if a user's account is linked to the corresponding Google account. Also, let's make sure we update the password column and make it nullable, as users who use Google for signing in won't have passwords in the standard sense. Alright, back to our Google Authentication Service. Let's retrieve the user entity based on a user's Google ID. If it doesn't exist yet, we'll create a new account in our system. Otherwise, we'll sign the user in and respond with the access and refresh token pairs. Lastly, let's wrap everything up in a try-catch block. If there was a conflict, let's make sure to throw a conflict exception. Otherwise, we can throw unauthorized exception. You may have noticed that we're using a unique error code here since we're using Postgres as our database. So this exact conflict logic here might look different if you're using a different database in your future applications. Alright, great. So moving on, let's save our changes and create an actual endpoint for everything by opening up our Google Authentication controller. Let's start by updating the controller prefix here to be authentication/Google, so it's consistent with other routes. Next, let's inject the Google Authentication Service using the standard approach. Now inside of our class, let's declare a single authenticate route that calls the corresponding Google Authentication Service method. We don't have a Google Token DTO class defined yet. Let's go ahead navigate to our DTO directory, and create a new google-token.dto file in there. Inside this file, let's add a simple class with one property that represents the Google token. With this in place, let's switch back to our controller class and make sure to add the missing DTO class import. And lastly, just to make this route public, let's make sure we annotate the entire controller with the auth decorator passing in auth type none. One last thing before we continue, since our UI is hosted on port 4000 and our API is on port 3000, we have to enable CORS or cross-origin resource sharing. Easy fix though. Let's open up our main TS file and add the following line: app.enableCORS, and that's it. With everything set up, now let's start our React application if you've set it up already, just so we can test the overall flow. If we open our browsers to port 4000, once our React app is built and running, we should see our Google Sign In button. Let's go ahead and click on Sign In as your account, and it should open up a pop-up or a separate tab in the full window mode, letting you choose the account you want to log in with. And after a successful login, you should see the access and refresh token logged out to your Chrome console. And there we have it. In just a few steps, we managed to integrate our Nest application with Google Authentication, one of the most popular one-click auth providers out there in today's world.